Originally, the title of this talk was Various Games and Blockchains. It turns out that blockchains have like a rich area of research in a lot of different fields like cryptography, game theory, consensus algorithms, databases, compilers, the list goes on. But after talking to a few students yesterday, I wanted to shift my focus from kind of research to more of what my journey was from academia into industry. Since I was like a pure mathematician, I studied a little bit of computer science, but I still consider myself, a topologist by training. So even though I work in the industry, I still think of myself as a mathematician. So yeah, what is this talk about? Just the three areas is more or less what my transition was like from academia into industry. Just a kind of breakdown of what I'm currently doing, kind of the problems I see, day to day, stuff like that. I'll introduce some, open research areas, and then just some general advice on getting like software jobs, since this is kind of like how I transitioned. Just some things like I wish I knew ahead of time. But yeah, feel free to, ask questions during the talk. Think of it as more of an extended Q&A. Yeah. So yeah, Wolfgang gave a really nice introduction to what I was doing here in grad school. I was here from around 2014 to 2020. And again, I researched kind of focused on group theory. I really like studying nice spaces. And it was, a fun time, just enjoyed unraveling like group presentations. Eventually, it kind of felt like you're just untangling a bunch of wires, so it was very cathartic. You can just relax to it. And actually, my favorite theorem still to this day is that, given any group, there exists a two complex whose fundamental group is isomorphic to that group. It's a very nice theorem. It's like simple, but at the same time, it's very powerful. This is a self-portrait of me at my time at FSU. Yeah.
Innovative development in 2012.
Oh, nice. Okay. I can tell. Yeah, so right after graduating, I got a job at UNG. That was the start of the pandemic. So my first semester coincided with everything just completely shutting down. And I'd say that gave me some more perspective, I'd say, like on kind of what I thought academia was going to be in the next 10 years. So I started forming my own idea of like what I thought this job could be. But just some direct impacts of like my life. Research was paused for a year essentially. The school didn't really have control over my day-to-day. It was all more or less mandated by USG. And at the time, budgets were frozen, so it looked like jobs would be impacted. People might be laid off, stuff like that. But on the positive side, I got to teach a lot of interesting courses. I piloted an intro to data science course while there. It was pretty fun. I got to teach cryptography, which was even funner. And then that's around the time I also started dabbling in like blockchain. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think one of the ideas that really caught my eye was this idea of like a flash loan. And so I'll say it in a very controversial way, since we're talking about blockchain. Flash loans will make you a millionaire, but within one state transition. So we'll talk about that in a second, though. So yeah, I started questioning what I was doing there. And luckily, I found someone with a similar background to me. He was a three-manifold topologist who moved from academia into the industry. He's Jesse Johnson. He's a pretty well-known three-manifold topologist. He was at Oklahoma State from 2009, I think, till about 2014. And during those times, he wrote a few really nice articles. The first one is a series called Dispatches from the Dark Side, where he more or less kind of dispels kind of myths about industry for academics. He himself kind of took an internship role, I think, at Google before he went full-time into industry. And then he has another post or an essay called The New Mathematician's Apology, where he more or less updates, Hardy's essay, A Mathematician's Apology, and defines like a role of what a mathematician is in modern day society. It's a really interesting read. If you're thinking about going into industry, I'd highly recommend just reading these essays. I think some key takeaways that he mentions, like they're listed here, but really, even if you don't have industry experience, like having the ability to move through abstractions is a very valuable skill. And so one of his arguments I don't have listed here is he more or less does kind of a case study of what it looks like to be a software engineer as a mathematician versus a software engineer as a computer scientist. Yeah, there's actually another interesting kind of encounter I had. I think this was maybe the fall of 2019. I met DeWitt Sumners one time. And during this conversation, he was asking me, what's your research area and stuff like that. I remember describing to him, what I was researching. And at the end of the conversation, I remember he looks at me, he's like, okay, so what are you gonna do with that? And I didn't know what to say. I was kind of stumped. And so it took me about a week to recollect myself and just figure out that I was mad. Because I didn't have an answer for it. And I was like, I just want to do research. But it turns out that at that time I was wrong. And I think he was more thematically right. So yeah, that's kind of like my background from going from academia into industry. But I think just to flip it a little bit, let's just look at a quick math problem. This is a math problem that you'd see at a quant interview or doing random research. So suppose you just have a fair coin and you flip this coin n times. What's the probability that in your sequence of flips that you have, at least 2 consecutive heads? So k is equal to 2 in this case. Just take a second to think about it. It's actually, if you come up with a solution, it has a really strange relationship, which is pretty beautiful, I'd say. And I'll give you one hint. Try to prove it by contradiction, and you'll get a really strange relationship. It's not a difficult problem, but has a really nice solution. So I'll skip the solution for now, but I think it's reasonable to say that as your n increases, this probability more or less approaches 1. And why would we care about a problem like this? Well, it turns out that this is kind of like an abstracted problem that you'd see in consensus algorithms. So this problem originally showed up when we were trying to show that in the presence of some Byzantine node, you'll always have rounds continue on. And we'll talk about what those mean in a second. But essentially, in a consensus system, you have a bunch of participants that are trying to reach some agreement on some piece of information. And the assumption that we always make is that 1/3 of these nodes are malicious. They can do anything. And 2/3 of these nodes are acting honest with respect to that system. And so one of the things that we had to show was that given 2 leaders that are actually honest, we want our consensus to continue. So more or less, this consensus problem was more dependent on a really simple math problem. So things just kind of appear everywhere in blockchain. So yeah, what am I doing now? Right now, my day-to-day, I'm kind of doing mechanism design for different blockchain systems. Initially, I was hired at the company as a programmer to implement like different application systems. One of my first projects was an order book. And so if you don't know an order book, it's more or less just different price levels where you have like some queuing system so that people can trade among those prices. But it turns out that in the current system, there was no way to support order books. So we had to come up with an efficient way of putting an order book on chain. Over time, my role shifted more into like theoretical challenges. So one day, so like one theoretical challenge that's kind of popping up in blockchain nowadays is that everything is dependent on elliptic curve cryptography. But right now we have about 5 to 10 years before elliptic curve cryptography is no longer secure. So if we don't come up with some quantum resistant scheme in the next 5 years, then anything of value in blockchain is more or less gone, because it can more or less be taken by any adversary. So we have these open problems that people have solutions for, but we have to implement them, or we have to make them more efficient. So that's kind of one of the areas that I work on day to day. I have to look up kind of like current research and quantum resistant cryptography and game theory, and apply those ideas to different design mechanisms within the blockchain system itself. And so my current role is kind of a blend between research and software engineering. Okay. So this is just kind of like a breakdown of what I'd say people do at my company currently. There's a lot of different experts that work at this company. I think the core engineering team is more or less programmers. But however, like within this core engineering team, we have people with masters and PhDs that worked on different areas such as compilers, formal methods, networking databases, stuff like that. And then outside of like this core engineering team, we have a research team. And actually, everyone on the research team is also a past academic that is either still in grad school or recently graduated. And so we have different experts. We have someone that kind of focuses on like ZK proofs. We have 2 people that are focusing on consensus mechanisms like BFT fault algorithms. We have people from trading firms that used to do quant trading. And then also we have a few people working on game theory and different mechanism designs. And then you have me, a topologist that kind of just moves around all these different areas, working on things that sound interesting. Okay, so I've talked a lot about blockchain. Haven't really told you what it is yet. So let me give you just some intuition on kind of the base mechanics of a blockchain. You can think of a blockchain as a finite state machine. So at time 0, you have one state. At time 2, you have another state, so on and so forth. And this state isn't held by one person, but a series of different people, so that anyone can request state transitions. And the canonical state transitions are more or less agreed upon by these sets of people, usually called validators. So what is this system generally good for? Well, it allows any participant to go into the system without having to trust anyone else, essentially. And it turns out that you can prove these types of systems are secure as long as 2/3 of the participants are honest. And honesty is usually incentivized through different either economic models or different consensus algorithms, proof of work, stuff like that. And so how do you actually change the state of this blockchain system? More or less, users will submit like, different transactions to the blockchain. And these transactions can range from like me transferring you $100 to complex computational operations. And this computation is usually handled by some virtual machine. Usually this virtual machine is Turing complete. And so each operation within this Turing machine, adding, pushing, loading, has a certain cost. And the sum of this cost is going to be the amount of money that I have to pay to have this operation to run. So we'll look at a quick example of a computation that's done on blockchain, but you can think of it as just a universal computer that you can pay to use. Okay, so this is the area that got me interested in blockchains like originally. And they're called automated market makers. Yeah, automated market makers, so AMMs. You might have heard of an AMM before. I think the most famous one is called Uniswap. And essentially, it's a decentralized exchange where you can trade anytime that you want. And it has a very simple structure. Let's just look at this quick example. Let's say that we wanted to trade between like Bitcoin and US dollars. Essentially, we have this pricing formula built into this smart contract. X times Y is equal to K, where X represents the amount of like Bitcoin that you have. Y represents the amount of USD that you have in this pool. And then K is just the multiplication between those two elements. And this is an invariant that allows you to trade between the different pairs. So let's say that at time 0, I wanted to swap one of my Bitcoin and get out some amount of dollars. So the initial idea is that if the pool has 10 Bitcoin and $200,000, then your K value is just going to be 2 million. And so the Bitcoin price in this pool is $20,000. But this is not as nice as an order book because you're not going to get filled at your exact price that you want. So if I swap in 1 Bitcoin, what I'm actually going to get out is around 18K. And to do this, we have to just solve like this equation that we've defined up here. And what you'll find is that when you put 1 Bitcoin in, you now get 11 Bitcoin, right? And solving for this new Y, you get 181K or so. And so the Bitcoin price pool, adjusts kind of dynamically on how you swap in. So this is, highly inefficient. You get a ton of slippage. It's not great when you don't have a lot of liquidity. But I would say this technology is now about 7 years old. So the last 7 years has been a really active area of research for these automated market makers. But I'd say the current philosophical field still follows this like basic idea here. And these automated market makers have like a really cool property actually. So on blockchain, transactions are atomic. So if it's my turn to submit some computation to the virtual machine, then I have full control of that computation. And so this pricing invariant, as long as this pricing invariant is held at the end of my transaction, I can do whatever I want with those pool of funds. So what this happens in practice then is that anyone can withdraw the complete supply of X and Y from this pool, perform some computation. A lot of the time these computations, there's arbitrage between different pairs of pools, and return all the XY at the pool at the end of the transaction. So basically, the intuition is you're able to perform arbitrage between different markets with 0 upfront capital. But in reality, this type of arbitrage is already being dominated by different trading firms. So I went down, this was one of my first projects that I did just for fun. I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. How do I make money off of this? So you can write your arbitrage bot, find different trading pairs to do arbitrage through, but it turns out that when you submit your transaction, it's in a public pool that other people can see. And so your transaction submission is done more or less by priority fees, which means you're in a first price auction. And so if you're in a first price auction, people will more or less outbid you to get whatever they think the expected value is. And one thing about first price auctions is that they're not incentive compatible. So over time, people are willing to pay more than what they truly believe they should be paying. And the result is that you're never going to land one of these arbitrages. But it's cool to think about. Okay, so yeah, what are some roles in software engineering jobs? I'd say I kind of work in between the intersection of finance and blockchain right now. But these are kind of the role breakdowns that you'll see at the company. You have core engineers, you have research engineers, and then you have manager positions. If you're interested in being a core engineer, this is more or less you're going to be implementing and supporting live systems. So you have to have a really strong CS background. And I'd say this is entry-level jobs for this are increasingly more competitive just due to CS graduation saturation. There's just a lot of people in the job market. But that's not really an issue. I think still long-term, this is a relatively safe career path. LLMs will not be taking jobs of software engineers that work on live systems. It's not easily automatable. And if you get a role as a core engineer, these job experiences kind of translates to different roles rather easily. So I'd say this is one good kind of job prospect. The second area is a research engineer. This is my current kind of role. And more or less, you're focused on pre-production systems. You're more interested in exploring new technologies, trying to make things more efficient. And really, this involves a lot of reading current research, a lot of prototyping, a lot of talking to academics still in academia still. So it turns out that auction theory is alive and well in the Northeast. Game theory is extremely popular up there. So you'll still be attending a lot of conferences. And I'd say this kind of role is better suited for PhDs. It kind of leverages your background a little bit better. But the downside is the work experience is not super transferable across companies. You'll have to learn new things constantly. Again, that's not an issue, but depending on where you are in life, maybe you just don't have the time to do that. And then finally, manager roles. Typically you get a manager role after you've been a software engineer for a while, but this is more of an advisor role. You're kind of guiding projects. You're not really doing technical work anymore. You're more or less kind of focused on the long-term vision of the company. Personally, I'm not interested in being a manager. I've done that before. It's much funner to work on technical problems. So yeah, definitely take some time to consider what you want to do. If you did want to do core engineering, definitely learn a low-level programming language like C++, Rust. Take data structures. You're not going to get away from data structure interview problems. Just take the course. It's not difficult, but it's just got to do it. And definitely keep studying more CS then. Look into operating systems, look into compilers. Pick what areas you're interested in, but then also pick a subject and just become an expert in that in itself. Whether it's networking, programming languages, formal languages, you have to have kind of a lever to more or less show like kind of where you're valuable at. If you do want to be like a research engineer, I'd highly recommend just learning a higher level language like Python. Still take data structures. They're still gonna ask you those questions constantly. But then you can pick, whatever you're interested in, whether it's like cryptography, consensus, topological data analysis. Like there's roles that you can find and leverage your background. Internships. Definitely get internships. I'd also say not all internships are equal. If you can get a good internship, it's just a strong signal to people in the industry that they want to keep hiring you. So for example, if you get an internship at a quant firm, your resume is just going to look different than someone that doesn't have an internship at a quant firm. Definitely start preparing for interviews early. So interview seasons, generally, it starts December. So that means you want to start preparing for interviews in October. So you're going to have to be cramming algorithms, fun brain teaser problems like the one that I did earlier. And then, there's plenty of online resources to walk you through the process too. I think the tech interviews are also changing. The last, 2010 to 2020, I think all the big tech companies like Google, Meta, it was very algorithm focused, but I think that's changing over time. So just keep looking at what interviews look like now. I think with large language models that kind of broke the algorithm interview process. Let's see. What else? And just I guess a summary on this talk. Definitely if you have 2 years left before you graduate, ask yourself some questions. What are you really interested in? What are you good at? And just do some soul searching. Then choose some direction that you want to go in, whether it's an engineering role, a research role. Both of these roles are going to be relevant in the next few years, regardless of LLMs. But they are coming, so watch out. And then once you decide, just start working. That's it. Also just some other random tips. Definitely get on social media. Maybe not LinkedIn. I'd say that's a lot of noise, not a lot of signal. But actually, I'd say things like Twitter will be better to understand kind of what's going on in the industry. A lot of active researchers in LLMs, blockchain, a lot of the conversations happen on Twitter. And so if you want to stay up to date, you kind of have to jump on different social media platforms. That's it.
Are there any questions? So knowing what you know now, you bring time back to grad school. What would you do? What would you do something different?
No. I mean, in grad school, it was fun just staying in the manifold garden. I had a lot of people surrounding me that helped that a lot. Maybe the only thing I'd do different is take a data structures class. That's about it. I think if you, if I did something else though, and let's say I wasn't doing math, I'd say there's either different master's degrees or PhD programs in terms of areas that would be more applicable to what I'm currently doing. So just as an example, one of my colleagues, he graduated from LSU a few years ago, and his focus was in consensus algorithms. And so now his current role is just doing research on consensus algorithms. So I'd say there might be better fits for different jobs, but the value of like a pure math PhD isn't lost to people in the industry. Like baseline, it just like more or less, to say it bluntly, like it says that you're smart, but like that only gets your foot in the door. It's like, I guess the question after that is like, what do you do? So I guess it's a kind of a evolving area.
Okay, maybe we have time for one more question.
Yes, thank you for the talk. Earlier, when you were talking about the mechanism design for blockchain system, I think you said something about ECC not being secure in 5 to 10 years. So
Right, okay.
Are you talking about quantum computing?
Well, so this is just a recommendation by the NSA that in 5 years, they want to move away from elliptic curves. And then in 10 years, you shouldn't be on elliptic curves at all. So I wouldn't say I have any forefront knowledge on what quantum computing is doing, but I guess it's more signal that if the NSA is saying that, hey, don't use that, then I would assume that we probably shouldn't use that. But yeah, I think there has been like a lot of like research done on quantum resistant like cryptography schemes. But I think the current problem with them is that they're generally, one, much slower than elliptic curves, and also a lot of the information that you have to have is much bigger. So I think just for an example, like the SecP signature scheme, I think it's like 128 kilobytes if you want to write a signature, versus for, I think, a general quantum scheme, it's like 2048 kilobytes. And it's, I think, like 100 times slower, which for current blockchain systems is like not great, especially things that want to move fast. So essentially, there's still like a lot of optimizations that have to be done to like quantum resistant schemes before we can actually put them in production.
Okay, let's thank our speaker.